Is Deb Coviello, and thank you for joining us on Live Talk Media, where I have my amazing guest, David Shriner-Cahn. He's an entrepreneur, podcast host of Smashing the Plateau and Going Solo, a past guest on the Drop-In CEO podcast, and someone I've simply grown to know and trust. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Deb. Great to be here.
Yeah, so I know this is going to be a great conversation. We are both entrepreneurs. We know about taking risks, accepting challenges. But let me just introduce my audience this week. One of the things that I wanted to talk to you about this week, and I actually wrote on it, was about overcoming challenges in a way that fosters growth and basically taking risks on yourself. And so if you're watching this now, I want you just to take a moment, shut the laptop or shut down that email, stop looking at your phone, because this is a moment for you to think about taking a risk on yourself. And Dave and I are going to have a great conversation, because one of the things that I question and I talk about is that as children, we take the plunge, we jump out of trees, we jump into the lake, and there's the thrill of cold water hitting our body. And then why, as adults, we don't allow that to happen. We don't enjoy the thrill of taking a risk and perhaps something wonderful happening. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave now, because I know you have a lot to share on this topic. But from your experience, what are some of the factors that people must overcome in order to be able to move forward and have growth?
Well, Deb, thanks for kicking off this conversation. And I think actually, as you were describing what happens when we're kids and we're willing to jump out of trees and jump into the cold water in a lake. I think, frankly, a lot of indoctrination starts with school. We're taught that if we make mistakes, it's really bad. If you don't get like 90% or more on something that you're trying, then we get a lot of negative feedback. So I think actually school starts teaching us that risks are just not good. That's one place that gets conditioned. The other thing is, both you and I had been employees for a significant chunk of our career before becoming entrepreneurs. And as employees, you also are judged very harshly or at least I think often you're judged harshly when you make mistakes. I know there's um, the theory of learning from your mistakes and failing fast in business. In my experience, that the freedom to make mistakes and not suffer consequences is often relegated to the CEO and much less so to employees. And in my experience as an employee, I would get criticized for what seemed to be relatively small mistakes based on taking risks. So I got conditioned to be really careful about taking risks. And as an employee, I'm taking risks with other people's money. And then when you become an entrepreneur, with all those years of conditioning and being careful, if it's your own money, it's very personal. So I don't know. I found in the beginning of my business, which I started 15 years ago, it seemed pretty daunting to take risks that involved my own money. And I've learned over time that actually when I'm feeling uncomfortable and I'm careful about what the risks are, and I do some some calculated thoughts about the risk, then I'm in a position to take the plunge and often to grow as a result.
I mean, that's amazing insight, and I share that as well. You to your point about failing off and failing forward, and hopefully learning from these lessons. But one experience that I had was I spoke up. I spoke up during a meeting. I may have said something that was a risk, but I just had to say it in the moment. That's what I was feeling. And later to be chastised, not only by my boss, but another interested party saying, Deb, you shouldn't have said that. But the missing part is, okay, that's feedback. what then should I have done? And I so often find that even if we take a risk and we're told to not do something or criticize, the big corporations seem to lack the systems to provide feedback or modeling of what is better behavior, because risk taking actually should be good. It's about what we learn and how we can evolve from it, not necessarily whether it was good or it was bad.
Correct.
So I'd love to move forward with this. So it's a truth. We don't take risks. We're criticized. We're admonished. We might lose a promotion. We might not get that raise or something like that. But I'm curious your insight, because I definitely have some thoughts about this. So we move into a new role. We have freedom. We have good leadership, but we're still afraid to take risks. Or to your point, we go into being a business owner. We're still afraid to take risks. Why do we hold on to those truths? Why do we hold on to those narratives? The people aren't relevant anymore. The situations don't exist. What is it that keeps people from moving forward and taking the risks? Or do you have some thoughts about what can they do now to be able to move beyond that?
Yeah. So I think that we definitely still do have those feelings of um, fear of what might go wrong, um, fear of what might happen if we're wildly successful, just fear of the
Yes.
unknown.
Yes.
Right, that's a big part of it. I know, like, for example, in the content creation world, I experienced this when I first started, when created my first blog post, which is almost 10 years ago. And I certainly felt it when I first started podcasting in 2014, which is this going to be good enough? Am I going to be embarrassed by this? What will people think? What will people think if I share some ideas that I think I believe in, but they might be controversial. So yeah, so the saying in the content creation world is, if you if you're not embarrassed later on by your first post, your first podcast episode, your first video, then you waited too long to release it.
Wow.
And it's so
Wow.
true, because I know I suffer from a little bit of perfectionism. I want to get things right. And actually, in business and in life, it's like, it's more important to get started. And when we observe somebody else's breakthrough, what we don't realize is there actually were probably hundreds, if not thousands, of tiny steps and pivots that got them to that point. So, people see, for example, that I've been podcasting for 7 years. We have produced episodes every single week for 7 years. And they're impressed by that. But what they don't realize is, all along the way, it actually takes a lot of effort. And I've made many pivots along the way in the way we produce content, the way we produce podcast episodes. It hasn't happened by accident, but people are impressed when they finally see the results 7 years later.
But the insight that you just shared was amazing. And I too share that. Hesitated on pushing the button on my first solo podcast. And it just took somebody saying, "What's holding you back?" And I said, "The only one is me." And yes, we will flub up our words and maybe something could have been better. But you're right. What's more important now almost is not necessarily the failure or the success, but it's taking that step forward one day at a time. It's the process that we should embrace. Move one step forward, get your production people, get your theme, get your strategy, and just take one step. Because when you look backwards, 7 years later, you've produced some outstanding and amazing and a lot of content.
Yeah, I'll give you another example that's really common, especially with solopreneurs, which is um, the whole issue of pricing. And if you're a solopreneur, you're pricing yourself. So there's a lot of self identity and ego involved. And I can't tell you how many times I have been reluctant to charge what I should charge. Over the years, I've gotten over that. But I see this especially with newer consultants. They charge too little. They charge too little for the value that they produce, and it's very hard to stand up in front of someone and make a pitch where you have no idea how they're going to respond to the price. But in fact, if you price too low, it is actually it's bad. You really do have to price in in co- coordination with the value that you produce.
So we could go on and on. There are so many different scenarios, whether it's starting a podcast, making a decision to go into business for yourself, or simply pitching something, whether it's on your own or within a company. These are all risks. It exists in our mind, but you've had a lot of experience. You do coach a lot of solopreneurs or people getting ready to make the plunge or to grow their business. What are a couple, two or three tips that you might suggest that people who are watching this might consider in order to see risk as not a risk, but an opportunity?
Okay, so the first one is what we've discussed is if you're feeling uncomfortable, it's a good sign. It means that you are facing a growth opportunity. Second is, and this is a question that I always ask people that are facing a decision that they feel is risky, and I ask myself the same question, which is, what's the worst thing that could happen? What's the absolute worst thing that can happen? And then when they answer, I say, okay, so what would you do if that comes to fruition? Right. So, I've interviewed many guests on my shows that have gone through business bankruptcy, personal bankruptcy, major family disruption, loss of a loved one that has disrupted their lives, all kinds of tragedies, and whether it's financial tragedies, personal tragedies, etc. And they have bounced back. And in fact, the act of bouncing back usually makes them stronger. And then the second time they face something similar, it's not so daunting. Like in my case, I got fired for the first time when I was in my late 20s. I was an engineer. The company that I worked for lost a huge amount of their business. They had to fire about half the staff. Had nothing to do with my performance, yet I was devastated. And it took me a long time to kind of figure out how I wanted to move forward from that and how to position myself so that I mitigated the potential fallout from the risk of losing a job. And in actual fact, I started my business in 2006 at the time that my job was terminated. But when it happened in 2006, not only was I thinking about what I was going to do if it happened, I was mentally and emotionally pretty well prepared for it, even though it was hard. Um, but I had a plan. I knew it could happen. I had a plan, so I knew if this in fact does come to fruition. Again, it was a situation that was not performance related; it had to do with the organization, not with me. Um, but because it had happened to me many years earlier, I was in much better shape to deal with it.
So this is really, really great advice, and you make it sound so easy. The mere fact that if you're uncomfortable about the decision or risk that you're about to take, feeling uncomfortable is a good thing because it means there's some validity in that you may need to take that decision and go forward. And then taking the position of what's the worst thing that could happen and could you handle that? It lessens the blow or impact and makes it a little bit easier to move forward. So I so appreciate that advice. And, there's so many people that you coach can help. And I also try to find people and help them with their confidence to be able to say, what's the worst thing that could happen? You might actually be successful. So, David, you are an amazing resource. I sincerely appreciate your professional friendship and supporting each other on our podcast and content like that. I know the viewers are going to really appreciate this, but I know people will probably want to connect with you and learn more about what you do. What are some closing thoughts or offers that you think may be good for people who are watching now?
Sure. So first of all, it's really important to get support when you're facing these kinds of changes because you commented, Deb, that in this discussion we're making it seem like it's easy to go through a major transition. It's not easy.
No.
You need support. And the way I have been supported when I've gone through transitions is being in being surrounded by like-minded colleagues,
Mhm.
um, finding people who can provide some kind of guidance or mentorship, and also hiring the right team members. Because when I hire a team member who can help perform particular kinds of tasks, it forces me to be accountable, to give them work to do so that things keep moving forward. And it
Mhm.
also relieves me of some of the burden of doing things. So it's not just mentors, but I also find hiring employees and contract workers can be super helpful when you're going through a transition. It's an often overlooked action. So resources that people can use. One thing we have an ebook on our site called 49 Tips to Help You Smash Your Plateau, and these are very bite-sized, actionable steps that 49 of my guests on Smashing the Plateau and Going Solo have described, and they're organized by 4 categories. So there's mindset, business development, productivity, and what the heck is the last one? Anyway, they're on our site, smashingtheplateau.com/tips is where you can download it. It's free, and in exchange, you'll get some emails from me that will provide ongoing tips and guidance to help you get through some of these rough spots in your business and your life. So that's a great resource. And if you want to, listen to our podcast or get in touch with me, smashingtheplateau.com is the place to go.
All right. So, David, thank you so much. Amazing resources. I get those emails, and the 49 tips are amazing. And for those of you that want to connect with the Drop-In CEO, Deb Coviello, please visit my website, dropinceo.com. And there you will also find a link to getting on the list for my new book, The CEO's Compass, Your Guide to Get on Track. While it is written for the CEO, all of the insights, also very aligned to some of David's work as well, can help anybody regardless of where they're at in their career, especially going through rapid transformation. So, David, you've been an amazing guest, and I wish you continued success.
Same here, Deb. Thank you so much. And I wish you lots of success.
Thank you.